Through the years, Reader's Digest has allowed readers to share some of the funny things that have happened in their lives in a few of the columns. And here's just a few of the submissions there. Trudy Trewin shares this. With the cyclone bearing down on us, my husband and I rushed to get our two boys fed and bathed before we lost power. I was washing up as my husband was hurrying the kids into the bath when the lights went off. Then, thinking the kids might be frightened, I quickly lit a candle and took it to the bathroom. The wind was howling, enough, I thought, to scare the wits out of any toddler. However, the only reaction from our eldest son, who had just turned 2, was an excited scream, "Cake!" Daphne Tobin submitted this one. Most of the bridal party and guests at the wedding reception I attended were from musical societies, so it was fitting when the groom sang a romantic song to his bride, accompanying himself on the guitar. Handkerchiefs dabbed at moist eyes as many guests succumbed to the emotion of it all. And then, as the last notes died away, a loud voice called out, "Thank you, we'll let you know." Joy Boyer wrote, my colleague used to play in a brass band that performed in park bandstands. It was their policy to keep on playing until every member of the audience had gone. One wet afternoon, they played to a very small group that had gradually dwindled, except for one man who lingered. And so the band played on and on. Eventually, the tuba player sidled over to the onlooker and politely asked him to leave so that the band could go home. "Actually," said the man, "I was waiting for the music to finish so I could put the chairs away." And finally, this one from Tracy Greenwood. As part of a scuba diving course, a friend of mine had to locate the instructor on the murky ocean floor and rescue him. The instructor assured her that, like a panicking person, he would struggle. And after allowing her quarry a minute's head start, she went down into the ocean depths. She found him. She removed his air regulator. She clasped him firmly and ascended slowly to the surface while giving him air from her regulator every second breath. True to his word, he kicked and fought strenuously and revealed on pulling off his mask that he was a complete stranger. And now for something completely different. In case it isn't apparent yet, we're looking at laughter this morning, and our text is Psalm 126, verse 2, where we find these words. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with joyful shouting. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. I want you to, first of all, see in our text this morning that laughter isn't always appropriate. And maybe you didn't see that part here in the text. But there is an indication here in our text that sometimes laughter is not appropriate. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we find that everything has a season, an appropriate time. And listed among those seasons we find in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 4, the beginning part of that verse, a time to weep and a time to laugh. A fit of giggles is not probably appropriate when you're sitting behind the widow at a funeral service. It's not a time for laughter. Bad enough when I was growing up to have the giggles in the middle of the sermon. You know, the preacher would say something funny and everyone would laugh. And then as he goes on to his next point, I'm sitting there thinking about what he had said that was so funny. And suddenly that laughter starts bubbling up inside me again, only I know nobody's thinking about the joke anymore. Everybody's gone on to the next point, and I'm going to stick out really bad if I start laughing, and so I'm trying to choke down that laughter, but it's sort of like trying to hold a sneeze. When you have to sneeze, you know, there's just no way. And pretty soon it starts coming out in those little, you know, that little snorts that you do when you got to giggle and you just can't do it. And that's when my mom would fix the death glare on me. If I was sitting right next to her, she had this wicked pinch. She'd take it on my thigh and just pinch right there, let me know, this is not acceptable behavior in church. But if I was out of arm's reach, she would fix that death glare on me until I made eye contact with her so that she could say without saying a word, you've had it, buddy. I might not be able to get to you right now, but as soon as church is over, you're in so much trouble. My mom had a wonderful way of communicating without saying a word. There's times when laughter is not appropriate. Did you notice that our text started out by saying, then our mouth was filled with laughter. Then our mouth was filled with laughter. It's pointing to an earlier time, before this time, when there was no laughter. A time when laughter did not come to them. So what was it that had made it inappropriate for them to laugh before this passage? Well, this passage is talking about when God's people had been released from captivity, when they were allowed to go home again. That's when it says, then our mouth was filled with laughter, when we finally got to go home. But in the previous period before this, when they were captives in a foreign land, there was no laughter with them at that time. Their years of captivity were bitter ones. They were the people of God who he had pushed away because of their unfaithfulness. He had delivered them into the hands of their enemies. And while they were there, estranged from their land in this foreign place where people spoke a foreign tongue, there was no place to worship their God. This nation didn't even acknowledge their God. There was no houses of worship. There was no temple that they could come apart to. They were estranged from God, and they couldn't even worship God. They were estranged and they were comfortless there. It was not a time for laughter. It was a time for tears, for bitter tears. And so we find recorded in Psalm 137 verse 1 this passage about their captivity. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion, when we remembered our homeland, where the temple was located, where we could be God's people and we could worship him in his presence. We wept to think of all the things that we didn't have in our estrangement from God. This reminds me very much of the fact that laughter is not appropriate for those who are estranged from God. Laughter is not right when we're at distance from God. Where's the one place where God cannot be found in all of things that have been created? Where's the one place where God is totally absent? We call it hell. Hell is the one place God has reserved apart from his presence. The one place where no portion of him enters in. The eternal dwelling place for those people who are forever estranged from God. And is that place a place of laughter? No, it's a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's a place of utmost despair because God is not there. To be estranged from the one who is our source of being, the one for whom we were made, the one for whom our souls ache, makes laughter say the opposite of the joy that laughter is meant to express. When we laugh as those estranged from God, it says something very different than what laughter is supposed to say. Those who seek frivolous laughter as they pursue sin make it an expression of their wickedness. Laughter bubbles up as them as a joyful celebration of sin. Those who laugh in response to the presentation of the gospel or of its author use laughter to express mockery. Some people engage in laughter to cover the lostness of their aching souls. They wish to hide themselves from the consequences of their lives through the hollow cackling that they engage in. And worldly comedians, I don't know how much you've subjected yourself to worldly comedians, but worldly comedians seek laughter in response to their vulgarities. Their acts are just strings of vulgarities to try to elicit laughter. That's not genuine laughter. That is an abomination, a corruption of laughter. Laughter is vile when it is in the absence of God. And we can all relate to a time in our lives before we came to God when our laughter was worldly and was not expressive of true joy. We only discovered the rightness and the satisfaction of laughter in allowing Him to destroy the old man of flesh in us. So Jesus warns those who would laugh in the absence of a relationship with God. In Luke chapter 6, verse 25, the last part of that verse, He says, "Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep." Sometimes laughter is not appropriate. When it means estrangement from God, laughter is never appropriate. And laughter might also be inappropriate for the Christian sometimes, for the person who knows God, for the person who is acquainted with Him, if it would cause him to take casually the tasks that He's instructed to us. Jesus warns us to focus on the serious task before us and to be aware of the brief time that we have to accomplish His purposes. He says in John chapter 9, verse 4, "We must work the works of Him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work." Yeah, it's not at the heart of our text, but we get that inkling there that sometimes laughter is not appropriate. But we don't want to stay there, do we? We want to get to what this verse is really about. What's highlighted here? And what this verse says to us is there's a time our mouths should be filled with laughter. There's a time when laughter is most appropriate, and it should be a part of who we are. Now, even as we pointed out that estrangement from God was a cause for weeping, so we're reminded that being welcomed into His presence should make us prone to laughter. As this captivity ended for Israel, God's people were filled with excitement and joy of coming home to Him. That's the formula for sincere, heartwarming laughter, you know. Excitement and joy. When those two things come together, that's when laughter is produced. And those two things come together when we are delighted to be in the presence of God again. When we understand what it means to know God and to be privileged to be with Him. That's the blessing we have as His New Testament people. It wasn't just Old Testament Israel coming back from their time of captivity that found that joy that led to laughter. That's the experience for God's New Testament people. We're no longer estranged from Him. We're to be gathered into our God's presence. And that means that we're overflowing with that same joy and excitement that kindles easy laughter. The weight's been removed from our hearts, and thus lightened laughter easily bubbles up. The wonderful fact of our being born again into His family should cause us to be percolating with such happiness that it comes spilling out of us. We need to divorce ourselves from the bad old days when the church thought smiles and laughter were too frivolous for the believer. And that we should have a perpetual scowl on our face and look like we had just been sucking on sour pickles. Gone are the darkened, quiet sanctuaries where a child's laugh would cause a couple of dozen people to swivel around in their pew seats and fix a disapproving look on them. Gone is the time for spiritual upsmanship where each person tries to strike a more haughty demeanor than the next one. Let us laugh and love and live as those Christ has rescued, and thus taste the fulfillment of being free, gloriously free in him. Let the endorphins be free to be released in our systems. Exhilarating happiness course through our bodies. Let the world see a radiantly joyful people, a people whose happy lives show it is blessed to know of the Lord. Our text again says, then our mouth was filled with laughter, our tongue with joyful shouting. And they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. You go ahead and go to your eternal reward, where angels piously sit on their clouds, strumming on their harps. I know my reward is to be forever in the presence of my God, and their joy will not be contained. And I know the heavens' courts will be ringing with laughter. Jack strode into John's stable one day. He said, I'm looking to buy a horse. Listen here, said John, I think I've got the perfect horse for you. This horse is really an amazing animal. Nice and fit at the prime of its life. It just responds so well to commands. He says, but the owner before on this horse was a little bit strange and taught the horse some unusual commands. He doesn't go and stop the usual way. The way to get him to stop is to shout, hey, hey. The way to get him to go is to yell, thank God. So Jim nodded his head. He says, fine with me. Can I take him out for a test run? So he climbs up on the horse and says, thank God. And the horse takes off, zooms across the open meadows. He's exhilarated to feel this horse's muscles tense beneath him as it just has this long, wonderful stride, just going past the distances. Everything's going by him in a blur. And then he sees it up ahead at the end of the meadow, the cliff, the drop-off. And now he's trying to think to himself, what was the command? Stop! Stop! And the horse doesn't stop. It was something repeated. What was it? Yo-yo! Yo-yo! The horse doesn't do anything. 5 yards from the edge of the cliff, he finally remembers, and he shouts out, hey, hey! And the horse plants all 4 feet and comes to a skidding stop 1 inch from the edge of the cliff. 1 inch. And Jim's heart's just pounding away, and he lifts up his hands to the heavens and he says, thank God. A laugh. Laugh's good. It's good for the soul. If anyone in all the world should be able to laugh, it's his people. This morning we come to our invitation time. Do you want to know the joy that comes from being united with God? Do you want to be able to have that happiness that cannot be contained in your life? That joy which radiates the presence of God coming from you? This morning, if you'd like to have that in your life, or if you'd like to make any kind of decision regarding a relationship with the Lord, we have an invitation time. We're going to invite you to come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song. We're going to sing, Trading My Sorrows.